Yay. Next time, we certainly encourage you to sing along because it's a wonderful song and they're such beautiful children. It's like, yeah, that's our future here. So today I would like to tell you a little bit about our speaker. She has spent her entire career working towards housing and economic justice through affordable housing and community development. She's most recently served as Director of Housing Development at First Community Housing, a leading San Jose-based affordable housing developer. Previous to joining First Community Housing, she was a member of the National Development Council's East team, providing housing and economic development consulting services to several East Coast municipalities, leading NDC's green initiatives and teaching several courses on community and housing development finance. She has also worked at the National Housing Trust, structuring financing for and overseeing the rehabilitation of occupied affordable housing properties, while employing green construction features. Born and raised in Richmond, California, after a significant stint on the East Coast, she has called San Jose home for many years, having both her daughters here in the heart of Silicon Valley. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Regina Celestin Williams. Thank you, Ms. Williams. It's all yours. You go for it because we're waiting to hear. It's a hot topic these days, you know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen. I'll do this really quickly. I'm really excited to have the conversation, and it's not popping up. Okay, I'm going to try this technique really quickly. Let's see. There it is. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. I guess I will start by just encouraging folks to get their questions ready. And I know it's hard when you're sharing your screen to see all the hands up, so I'd appreciate any support in that as I present today. But I don't want to just be talking at you. I would love to be talking with you. So as Janelle mentioned, my name is Regina Celestin Williams. I am the Executive Director at SB at Home and excited to be here today. Let me see if I can get these slides moving. Oh, there we go. So typically we start with a land acknowledgement. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the indigenous peoples of the Ohlone, Muwekma, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamian Nation, and Amut Mutsun, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land and who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. At SB at Home, our mission is driving the creation of affordable housing for a more vibrant and equitable Silicon Valley. I've been honored to hold the space as the Executive Director of SB at Home for over a year now. We've been around for 7 years. And we really believe that housing is a human right, that diversity in our communities makes us stronger. It's so critical, and we'll see from our talk today, to center equity and inclusion in our work. And really, the foundation of SB at Home and how we work in this space is that housing policy is not just about housing. One of the reasons why I'm so grateful to be here in this really diverse room of folks today. And just working in partnership is more impactful. Together, we can create a more vibrant and equitable Silicon Valley. And so again, it's not just about housing. It really is about providing housing that improves educational outcomes, health outcomes, and job prospects, all while combating climate change, taking cars off the road, and boosting our local economy. There's so many things that tie into, um, you know, great housing policy. So today I've been asked to talk a little bit about the history of the affordable housing movement, and how it really is tied closely to social justice. We all, especially in this space, experience and recognize that everything is tied to where you live. So access to housing is one of the key cornerstones of life outcomes. That's health outcomes in our communities, quality of schools are tied to where you live, the job opportunities that you have, access to economic engines, policing, and the presence in our communities is different based on where you live and where your homes are located. Access to capital, being able to infuse capital into our neighborhoods. Healthy food access is critical and dependent on where you live. That ties to health outcomes as well. Access to transportation, how you can conveniently and healthily get to and from the amenities, the resources, the opportunities that you need to have access to, and then the quality of infrastructure. So throughout the history of this country, housing and the fight for equitable housing, as you can see from this image, has been critical to quality of life. So we're jumping right in, talking a little bit about the history of redlining in this country, and how even cities like San Jose, and really especially cities like San Jose, were historically redlined in racist, through racist policies and influences that really denied people of color access to certain neighborhoods, and really reinforced the city that we experience and see today. So redlining was the practice of a national financing system that was federally funded, really investing in certain neighborhoods, and then having clear maps like the one that you see on your screen, identify areas that you don't want to invest or were sort of like incentivized not to invest in. And so it's a practice of discriminatory lending. And you can see these redlined areas are considered hazardous. They could have been considered hazardous because there were foreign-born peoples there, or a high presence of Negroes was the type of language that was used to sort of say, these areas are on the decline, don't invest your resources there. Whereas the green areas are the best areas, and the areas where primarily financing went through the Federal Housing Administration. So this was very impactful because homeownership, it still is the #1 method of building wealth in this country. There was this federal program through the Federal Housing Administration that really incentivized these maps and reinforced racism in where everyone lives, and the value of everyone's home. And so you can sort of see from some of these images that there was a lot of promotion around having access to financing through the Federal Housing Administration in the early 1900s. And this provided low down payments for folks, reducing the barriers to homeownership, long-term mortgages, making the monthly mortgage payments lower on this large value asset. And a lot of the lending practices were driven by concerns around default. folks not being able to pay their mortgages. And so there was a lot of fear also that was infused into these practices, these discriminatory practices. And so what you have is each individual household not only building wealth through homeownership and saying, this is my asset, I have to protect it, and I have to protect its value. And so really claiming communities as communities that they don't want risk in, which they associate with people who don't look like them. But you also have discriminatory practices by realtors, by lenders, and the result is that during this period of time, which is an extensive period of time from 1934 to 1968, 98% of home loans were given to white families. So let's just think about the history of this country. One, let's think about how 1968 wasn't that long ago. And then think about the impact of having that kind of access to capital exclusively go to white families and benefit white families, creating these suburban neighborhoods. And then the flip side of that coin, which is the limitations placed on Black, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, immigrant communities, because of the racism that's just like attached to homes, home ownership, neighborhoods in this country.
Jesus.
So what's the next phase? Along with what's going on with homeownership, there's a very huge effort by the government to subsidize access to rental housing. There's the U.S. Housing Act in 1937, which creates what we've known as public housing in this country, really trying to address the needs of low-income people. And it established what became HUD, what we know as HUD today, was the United States Housing Authority, and really an effort to house folks who were low income and maybe didn't have, access to the large subsidy provided by the FHA through homeownership in these urban areas. And so we know that that became synonymous with crime and slums. And there was just a really negative connotation with the idea of public housing, partly because of white flight into these suburban neighborhoods, and then partly because of, maybe a lack of maintenance and upkeep by this federal housing authority. And so with in 1968, we get the Fair Housing Act, which really is looking to end discrimination in all these different forms, right? All of these negative connotations in housing, whether it's public housing or how federal subsidies are going towards homeownership. How do we want to end the discrimination permeating throughout the legacy of housing in this country? And so the Fair Housing Act does that. And one of the core principles is affirmatively furthering fair housing, which really doesn't get much attention until as of late, really. It was strengthened under the Obama administration in HUD and the federal government. And the term affirmatively furthering fair housing was really pulled out and finally defined as seeking to combat housing discrimination, eliminate racial bias, undo historic patterns of segregation, and lift barriers that restrict access, so that we can have inclusive communities and actually achieve racial equity, fair housing choice, and opportunity for all. So really, as of late, we've always, since 1968, heard about fair housing law. You've heard more about affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is like a proactive stance on fair housing and really making sure that our communities are no longer exclusive and that we are achieving racial equity. So this is unfortunately, a newer concept, 50 years later. So, what does that mean again for our community in the city of San Jose? What it means is that a lot of the legacy of redlining still persists in our region, in this country, and in this region. And in particular, here's a map of the city of San Jose that's showing that, the exclusive practice of that originated with redlining and lending back in the 1930s continues today through other land use regulations and zoning. And in particular, the single family zoning has been one that's really maintained sort of like the neighborhoods that were created back in the early to mid 1900s because of the lack of access to home ownership and to be able to live in single family homes by minority and marginalized groups of people. In the city of San Jose, 94% of the city, 94% of the geography, the landmass of the city is zoned for single family homes. This is an urban city with 1 million people. And so, and only 50% of residents live in a single family home. So what does that mean? All of the multifamily housing are in a very small portion of the city. And there's a lot of, exclusive access to the majority of the city. That's why there's been a lot of policy as of late to really eliminate single family zoning as a statewide effort, because it's a legacy product of exclusive and racist practices in this country. So I'm switching gears a little bit, going to just talk about some data that shows, some of the challenges around housing and how we've gotten here sort of to this housing crisis that we're in today. So as you can sort of see, home prices continue to rise. Access to home ownership continues to be limited to a small, minority of folks, especially breaking into home ownership as prices rise dramatically. This data goes through the end of 2021, and you can see that even during the recession that came right after the pandemic, prices weren't falling. There was a surge. Since then, we've seen more flat prices, but not falling. And we'll have to update this to show what's happened in the last year. But you can see that prices continue to go up in this county tremendously. And there's a growing gap between renters and homeowners who can access homeownership opportunities. This is, something that has really been a challenge for folks who have traditionally been excluded from homeownership, Black and Brown folks. And, the gap between renters and owners continues to grow. So the portion of folks who are able to attain homeownership continues to be out of reach. And we can see from these occupations of just the everyday person how hard it is to afford to rent in this area, let alone purchase a single family home. Here's another chart that shows that, the effects of the pandemic and how rents just never went down, really. Just really continue to either flatten out a little bit or go up slightly. So as folks, had loss of employment of their businesses as entrepreneurs, and businesses had to close down. Just rents continue to go up, except for a slight dip at the very top of the spectrum. And a lot of this is tied to, I think, what's really critical when we're looking at the data, and in terms of like what we can be doing to resolve sort of the challenges of housing in this region, is that the concept of shared prosperity does not exist. Our economy in this region is booming. Jobs go up, folks become millionaires. It is Silicon Valley. There's so much success, and there is not enough effort by all of us involved who benefit from this economic engine, whether it's the private sector and the businesses to the local governments and everyone in between, to really have the amount of housing that's being built keep up with the amount of jobs that are created. So this shows a 7-to-1 imbalance between housing and jobs, and the fact that, this region is very successful economically, and yet we have folks getting displaced and falling into homelessness constantly. And they're tied together. They're not, disassociated from each other. Oops. Looks like this is the last graph that I have. Oops. That shows, again, that we can sort of account for the need to build housing. There's a requirement by the state, if any of you have been involved in the housing element process and the RENA goals process, there is a requirement by the state to do an assessment of each region's housing need, and what number of homes do we need to build in order to get out of this sort of housing crisis where so many people are being displaced out of the area and out of their homes. And the production has not kept up with that identified need. And it's most acute in terms of, the need in the low income housing range, and not keeping up with pace with how many units are created for that portion of the population. I think the interesting part of this is that the number of units needed to fill the need on the high income is about how many units are built by the market. The market is somehow keeping pace with the demand when it comes to high income. But for low income, there's a huge difference between the need and the number of units built. And for moderate income households, we know the same, that we are not doing a good job of serving our households that are moderate income and allowing them to stay in this region. So the way that SB at Home approaches our work is really through the 3Ps framework. And so I wanted to share this with you before I left, which is, our housing crisis is because we have failed to produce enough housing for residents of all incomes, but especially low incomes. We failed to preserve existing affordable housing. And so we lose affordable housing units on an annual basis, and that displaces our neighbors. And we also failed to protect our current residents from displacement. And so that is the 3Ps framework, is to produce enough affordable housing and housing of all incomes, preserve existing affordable housing, and protect tenants so that they are not displaced or threatened to be displaced from their homes. This is just to help ground us in what it means to have affordable housing. In last year, the numbers for an extremely low income household, for a family of 4, was up to $50,000. When we talk about very low income, that's up to 84,000 for that household of four. When we talk about low income, that's up to $134,000. So these are the folks who, all three of those ranges that are really being displaced. Folks who are working, working poor, working class folks, and we're not building enough housing for these folks to be able to stay in our area. The goal with affordable housing is really to limit the cost to be something that's not overly burdensome. And we really typically look at 30% of a household's income having that cost go towards housing, so that the other 70% can go towards other things, including paying your taxes, any transportation needs, clothes, food, those sorts of things. If you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, then you really are at risk of displacement, because it just gets to be unsustainable. And so through that, there's deed restricted units. We try to, which said, whoever's operating those rental units cannot charge more than a certain amount of rent, depending on the household income of the folks living in those units or assumed to be qualifying for those units. We try to reduce the cost of housing for that household. That might mean, a subsidy, like a housing choice voucher or a Section 8 project-based voucher from the Housing Authority or some other sort of rental assistance. And these are all typical strategies for allowing low-income households to be able to live affordably in the region. So that's really it. I wanted to make sure to be clear that, more housing is the solution to the homelessness that we experience in our communities, and our strategies to protect tenants from displacement in the first place, preserve existing affordable housing where people are already living, helping their homes to stay affordable, and to produce more housing are our strategies for creating a sustainable Santa Clara County. So with that, I will open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we have many questions, and the first one is by our CEO, Greg Kefferly. Go, Greg.
Hey, Regina, just want to say thank you for a great presentation, very compelling. And I need my board to see this. I think it'll and lots of folks to hear from you. As you talk about produce, preserve, and protect, want to get your thoughts on, for us as a community, to promote greater equity and, as you use the language of shared prosperity. Because as I think about the equity issue, a big challenge there is the access to that capital, whether it's a home or whether it's secure housing, whether rental or owned. So if you think about what in your top 3 policy goals, may not be short term, but maybe the longer term, on that preserve, produce, preserve, and protect, what would you say if we could rally behind 3 policy solutions? And I know there's no silver bullet, but if there's 3 policy solutions, you say, you know what, if we rallied behind these 3 things, that could kind of move the lever a little bit further towards that shared prosperity and equity.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we at SV at Home have been very supportive of, from that specific frame of reference of shared prosperity, is collective ownership and community ownership models. And the reason is because, if we look at this history and we think about how in this country we all have been sort of trained to think about our homes, if we're blessed enough to be homeowners, are an asset, then we all become protectionists of that asset. And so what does that drive us to do? That drives us to show up differently when there's a decision to be made about, a new development on our street, in our neighborhood, that has us show up differently when there's certain policies that come to our local jurisdictions that we feel may impact the value of our asset. It's almost like homes are not homes anymore. They're, stocks or investments. And so the idea that, there are communities that have been marginalized, that have been excluded from homeownership, not just through policies, but like from taking of land and burning down our properties and all the history of terror in this country, there can be a shift policy-wise and framework-wise from our home as our asset, as our investment, to shared ownership and stability, right? So from this is how I'm building wealth, to this is how I'm staying stable in my community, where I have roots and I have all the resources I need to thrive. And so the things like community land trusts, cooperative housing models, community opportunity to purchase acts, like all of that sort of community ownership models are really important for shifting away from what I own, what I need to protect, to a home is about stability, about community, and about not being displaced. Moving towards anti-displacement work and protecting people who are already in our community. And while it's not a policy that's focused on building our way out of the crisis we're in, it is focused on shifting the way we think about what home is. And so I think that's one policy area that's absolutely worth supporting, because we need that shift. I think, the other sort of big policy move is around thinking about preventing folks from falling into homelessness, and thinking about like, what can we do around, like, how is housing policy not just about housing policy, and how can we strengthen the social safety net so that folks aren't falling into being unhoused and displacement, because that is traumatic and it's more costly on our society trying to figure out how to get folks out of being unhoused than to keep them in their homes. So those are the two policy areas that I think, along with production, because we are so far behind, but I think are really big shifts in how we think about just stabilizing our communities and making sure that they're places that people can be and thrive long term.
Thank you. I think, Carmen, you had a comment in the chat. Did you have a question, please?
Yeah, so like I said in the chat, this was fantastic information. And I have a few things. I may need to do a little one-on-one with you separately. So I have a few things that I want to just bring to put that on the table here. So first of all, I've been, every time I see you, I always put a little bug in your ear about senior housing. So that's something I know we're not talking about. We're still not talking about really in depth. And I'm super concerned, especially when you show those numbers that you just showed. And it's not just senior housing in building senior housing, but these facilities that already exist, and the costs to be housed in those can range from $5,000 to $7,000 a month. And that's just the rent for the housing. That doesn't include any services that older adult would need. So that's something we have to start thinking about, and we just are not. So I'm going to keep putting a little bug in your ear every time I see you on it. Secondly, has this kind of information, and it probably has, so I don't think that it hasn't been done, but I just wanted to ask myself, because has this information been bubbled up to those who are in our government and our elected officials? Because when recommendations are made to them, it seems like they don't even know or understand the depth of disconnect, right? How deeply, how much it costs for us to live here, the type of income it takes to be successful here. And they continue as I see it, they continue to make decisions that are just Band-Aid decisions and not really looking at root cause and not really thinking long-term. And it really concerns me because so many things have been put forth before them, but they continue to act in a way like it's not that urgent or it's not that big because it's not impacting me or the community I serve. It only seems to be certain communities that are coming forward saying something, but the others who are not impacted don't seem to care. That's honestly how I look at it. There's obviously something going on here that we are comfortable with people living on the streets. There's something seriously wrong with us.
So you actually said a lot of things, Carmen, that are absolutely indicative of why we're still here. One, so I'm new to SB at Home, new to this side of the work that's more connected to policy and politics. And politicians do tend to be focused on the short term. Their jobs are structured that way. They run on cycles, whatever the term of their office is. They do have to move from one cycle to the next, and halfway through or a few years into one cycle, be ready for the next election to talk about results. The challenge is how we got here didn't happen quickly. There's been a lot of intentional discrimination, disinvestment in certain communities, long-term, deeply seated structural issues. And how we got here did not happen overnight. It actually happened over many, many decades. And you could even go back further than that to talk about how we got here to this particular position that we're in, especially as Black people in Santa Clara County. So what I would say is that there's been a huge amount of positive efforts, wins, momentum in the last few years. We've had passage of huge bond measures that have spurred a lot of new development and production. We've had passage of policies around preservation and tenant protections. Lots of tenant protections have been put in place as of late in the county and other cities like Palo Alto and Mountain View. We've had a lot of the regulatory barriers that existed for, since zoning has been a thing, are starting to become removed. Like I mentioned, single family zoning is no longer a thing as of like 2 years ago. In the state of California, you're allowed to build up to 4 units on a lot that's zoned single family. So we're slowly removing these barriers, but it's going to take time for the communities, our neighborhoods, to be able to change as a result of some of these barriers being removed. We're just now starting to talk about root causes, just now going after these land use regulations. And there's been this momentum at the state over the last 5 or 6 years to really remove the barriers, streamline housing production, and build more densely near transit in cities where we should be building more densely. And so what I see now is a string of politicians saying, okay, we're not seeing the results we want to see, and we're not, in the sense that we still see people falling into homelessness. We still see people that need help. But we are seeing results in the fact that we built a tremendous amount of housing that didn't exist 5 years ago to serve people who are at the most need, a tremendous amount of housing that is interim solutions, being able to help people come off the streets immediately and prepare to go into more permanent housing, and more policies around homelessness prevention than we've ever seen before, especially in this county. So there's been a lot of wins, a lot of success, a lot of progress. It doesn't feel like it experientially. And then our politicians are telling us they can help it go faster, but that's not how it works. So I think that, it's good to have folks in all aspects of the work who can say, yes, I acknowledge this legacy of racism and obstructionism and exclusivity. And now we have to continue to invest in the solutions that we know work to house everyone, because everyone should have a dignified home, a permanent home, and not have to be at risk of displacement again, because there's not enough permanent homes to take folks out of the interim housing. So I feel like it is a time to continue to invest in the progress we've seen over the last few years, because it is going to take real persistent progress and sticking to the same investment to get out of this in a very cohesive way than trying a new thing every 3 or 4 years.
Thank you. Thank you. When we have these chats, we always almost run out of time, but we have several people who have questions in the chat. And so we'll ask that their questions and their comments will be brief, but we want to hear them. And I think we want to call on Jamal Williams, who has a very interesting piece to ask. Jamal, where are you?
He says we can read it.
Okay, all right.
Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
Go ahead.
I can read it. It says, Mayor Mahan talks about regulations in California being a barrier to housing, and that we have very strict regulatory laws that contributes to prohibiting housing being built. And I sort of touched on that because I saw that question come in. But, it's great that we have folks like our mayor of San Jose who recognize that these barriers exist. These laws are just starting to get placed on the books. And we haven't, there's a lot of research studying, have they been effective? A lot of them, they have to tweak them to make sure they can be as effective as they should be. But we're just starting to get these laws on the books that are removing the barriers. And it really is a time to invest in seeing what can happen now that we have these laws in place to remove these barriers. But absolutely, we want every, politician, legislator to recognize the history of barriers to housing, but also recognize the opportunity with the recent legislative push to get rid of some of these barriers.
Thank you. Let's see, who was it? James McCaskill, you have a question?
Thank you for the excellent presentation. Great to learn a bit more on the background material. Question around sort of regulations for developers who are required to provide affordable housing as new developments and those sorts of things. If you might have some observations or opinions about the effectiveness of those policies and whether they're making a difference.
Yeah, so I believe you're talking about inclusionary zoning ordinances that require developers that are building market rate housing to have a portion of that housing be built that's affordable. Is that correct? Okay, so the biggest, I would say, what we see is that a lot of municipalities have inclusionary housing ordinances that give developers a few options. So the first option is you can pay a fee and not build any affordable housing at all. Okay, so if I pay, if I'm building 100 units of market rate housing, if I pay $5 million to the city, that waives the requirement because I've paid this fee, I've met my requirement to, contribute to affordable housing, and then the city is supposed to put that money into an affordable development. Other alternatives are for me to, if I'm going to develop on these 2 acres of land, maybe I carve out half an acre and I work with an affordable housing developer to build affordable housing just on that half acre. Now I've donated land, it's called a land donation, and my requirement is met as long as that affordable housing development has enough units to meet the requirement by my larger development.
Are you
And
taking a
so,
break?
and then the original desire, the sort of original way of meeting the requirement is for me to build, let's say I'm building 100 units, 15 of those units, 15% as affordable, as a part of my development, and make sure that I'm providing those units to households that are, moderate or low income. So those are the various ways you tend to see. And what happens is that if I don't build the units in my development in and of itself, there could be delays on realizing the other paths. So if I give the 5 million to the city, well, how are they making sure that affordable housing is moving forward in other parts of the city with the funds that they're raising around these fees that they're charging? If I donate land to a developer, how is the timing of the project they build keeping pace with the market rate units that I'm putting on the market? And so, and the way that we hold accountability and things like that differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and housing, inclusionary housing ordinance to inclusionary housing ordinance. We absolutely advocate for there to be all these paths, but typically we advocate that the affordable units are realized as a part of the original market rate development so that it's mixed income, or that there is a significant amount of support for any land donation so that project can be realized. But it's really about partnering with the cities to make sure that if those alternative means are taken, that the affordable units are built. So those are the challenges, is that the developers have various paths to take.
Thank you. Thank you. Great questions. And I know we could get more information on that as well. I think the next person, we have 2 more people that have questions in the chat. Desiree.
It's Desiree.
Desiree.
Desiree. Desiree.
Desiree.
Hi.
Hi, thank you.
Hi. I know we're running out of time, and I just want to mention about the housing element. I heard you mention that earlier today about the housing element, and they are pretty strict. The state places some really, really strict numbers on cities to be able to produce affordable housing at rates that they can't do within, the 8-year period by which they're given for the housing elements. So I think that, and I think Gavin and his wisdom and his need to really make sure that we produce these housing is going in the right direction. But you can't create affordable housing without building market rate housing, for the very reasons that Regina just mentioned. Because cities don't build houses. First of all, they have to partner with an affordable housing developer to be able to do that. And then secondly, the zoning of the land that we have, in terms of being able to turn them into housing, and the skyrocketing price of building homes these days is cost prohibitive. So I think it's an economic factor that we really have to consider, although I'm very supportive of affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very kindly. Joyce? You're muted.
As I wrote in the chat, I'm a social worker and I work here with Catholic Charities, but my training is in child welfare. So what we're doing and what we're looking at is helping the chronically homeless remain housed after they have been placed or successfully applied and acquired a home. And the charities housing area. And charities housing is specifically for people who have been homeless, whether it be chronically or environmentally due to DV, anything like that, divorce, separation, total lack of income suddenly, anything that has displaced them. But I found that with the chronically homeless, what we're looking at is behavior modifications. You know, it takes a lot of strength to live on the street. And it takes a lot of weaponry that we don't need when we're living in homes. But we don't have enough transitional housing in order to take a person from, say, that point A to point C.
Yeah.
We need a B. You know, and I'm not seeing the B, so I am becoming the B. You understand? And I'm in the midst of helping to develop programs in my community, in the areas that I work in order to help. But I can't do that in the long term, and it needs to be long term. So what does, you know, I don't know if it could be tied together. If not, that's okay. But just in your thoughts, what can be done to help a person in the chronic homeless situation go from survival mode, where we are when we're in the street, survival mode to thriving?
Excuse me, I don't mean to cut you off, but if you could send that information to me and I will send it to Regina and see if she can answer that offline. We're really, really up against the clock, and we always get cut off right in the middle of everything that we're doing here, especially because our programs they're only 1 hour long, and sometimes we just don't get to cover everything. So let me ask Greg if you have some closing comments.
So I just want to say again, just how honored we are, Regina, to have you present to us today. I know an hour goes by fast, and you packed a lot in there, and there are a lot of questions. So I'm hoping that folks that are interested, there may be some opportunities for follow-up on this. So wonderful to have you with us.
Can I just share that at SV at Home, we do have a learning series called Deep Dive. We are going to be talking about tenant protections. I saw the question about rents in June, and we have our past trainings are online. So we do like an affordable housing 101, intro to affordable housing, and we have one about fair housing. And I just want to encourage folks, if you get a chance to watch those recordings, they're really insightful.
Thank you, Regina.
Thank you, Regina. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
we're just
Regina.
going to have to do a follow-up on here, and thank you for all of your information, and for meeting you for the first time, and for all of you that joined us today. Next month, join us. I think we're talking about something about broken churches, families, and how to heal them in the trauma to get to the other side. But we'll let you know the exact date, but we certainly look forward to you. Join us next month. Father John?
Thank you, everybody. And that our guest for next time will be Reverend Ray Montgomery. He's going to be presenting some of his thesis. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and this wraps up our time. Thank you, Ms. Junier. Thank you behind the scenes, Riley, and thank you, Greg. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. See ya.